Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Beyond COVID event, giving you the lowdown on the lockdown. Today marks exactly a year since we went into lockdown in South Africa, and it was supposed to be just 3 weeks, right? Little did we know we'd still be here on level 1, 365 days later. The COVID-19 pandemic has shaken South Africa's people, it's shaken our economy to the core, and the stats have been really terrifying. In the second quarter of 2020, our gross domestic product plummeted by 51%. Unemployment, as you know, has skyrocketed. And 5 months into the lockdown, specialist management company Red Flank released the initial findings of the BeyondCOVID Business Survey, analyzing the impact of COVID-19 on businesses and the approaches that businesses are adopting in response to these challenges and opportunities. And at an event much like this one, 6 months ago, when I was here presenting as well, Red Flank released the results of that initial survey, and they were pretty alarming. They clearly demonstrated the urgent need for intervention. So BeyondCOVID, registered as a non-profit company at the time, working to develop and enable a supportive framework for the creation of SMME opportunities for scale and employment. We need to create jobs. And BeyondCOVID assists businesses with services and technology, making them more robust, more sustainable and bankable, ultimately helping them survive the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So now, 6 months later, we again take a look at the updated findings of the BeyondCOVID Business Survey, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what these results are, although I may have had a bit of a sneak peek, but it looks at which sectors are recovering, thriving, which are still under threat. And we know that so many businesses are still struggling at the moment. So Red Flank conducted the BeyondCOVID Business Survey between July of last year to March of this year. They surveyed nearly 4,500 companies, more than half of which were micro to small businesses. So here are some of the highlights of that survey, which will be presented shortly. Just a little taster, because I don't want to steal the thunder of what's coming, but it's a bleak picture for SMMEs. 26% of SMMEs report being forced to close their doors. 21% of businesses polled are closed. A third of businesses have expressed the need for funding over a 6-month period. And what I'm finding really interesting as well is the number of businesses with staff that are working from home. That's now dropped as more people go into the offices. So Lings and Matt are going to have more of the results of that survey for you. They really are fascinating. And there's lots of highlights to take out as well. And then we will also unveil the plans of BeyondCOVID has in place to revive the SMME sector and assist in driving employment. We know it's all about creating jobs at the moment and real meaningful employment as well. So I'm now going to hand over to Lings Naidu and Matungo Chidi. They're going to present the results of this survey. Specialist management consultancy, Red Flank, did the survey, and Lings Naidu is a director at Red Flank Solutions and a joint founder of the BeyondCOVID initiative. Matt is a joint founder of the BeyondCOVID initiative too, and is a director at Mzabalazo, a boutique development consultancy. So Lings and Matt, over to you with the results of that survey.
Thank you so much, Mandy. And when we look at the survey results, I guess a good place to start is the people, some of whom are in the session today that have actually provided the data that the survey is based on. Now, if we look at the survey, 4,377 responses were received from people that are typically at senior levels in organizations. And this was over a period. So what's quite powerful in terms of the results that we will present today is, given that the results were gathered over the course of the last year, it allows us to reflect and understand how things have changed for businesses over that period. Now, with regards to the survey, it was a national survey, covered all types of businesses and covered all sectors as well. So this is as comprehensive a view as we can get with regards to the impact of COVID-19 on businesses in South Africa. And you'll see that Mutungwe will talk as well about the outlook going forward. With regard to the businesses that were covered, as you would expect, the bulk of them were micro, SMME businesses. So if we look at the slide, you'll see 56%, so more than half, were micro to small. So these are 50 or less employees in a business, going up to medium, a fair representation from corporates, public sector, and NPOs as well. Now, just to talk about the timeframes, as we all know, the lockdown, which kind of signaled the start of COVID in South Africa, started at the end of March. So the COVID period really started from about April last year. In terms of our survey, it was conducted over 3 quarters. So the period from July, August, September was the first period. And those are the results that you would have seen that we reported around October or so last year. And then we also measured the next 2 quarters. And with regards to the trends over that period, that's what we'll pick up on in the next slide. The good news is that with regard to the next slide, what we see here is there are some good positive indicators. So small improvements, but we can see that the economy is starting to recover. Now, if we look at a couple of the key indicators here, business as usual is the one that we'd want to keep a keen eye on. And as you would expect, what we'd want that business as usual number to move up. So as you can see at the start of the COVID pandemic, we were around 1 in 5 or 20% of businesses on business as usual. And at the moment, it's improved, slightly up to 21%. If you look at businesses operating on reduced capacity, there's a similar positive trend there. Where a lot of focus is going to be placed is the last bar, the rightmost area of the graph. And with regard to that, that shows the number of businesses closed. So you can see slight improvement there as well, a drop from 23% down to 21%. The other indicator we want to keep an eye on here is of those business closures, how much of them are permanent. So you'll see from the 21% that are currently closed, 16 of them say they are temporarily closed, which means around 80% or so of those businesses indicate that they will be reopening. Interesting trend to look at here is that you'll see both with business as usual and the businesses closed, there was an improvement around Q3. So that would have been around November, early December. And the reason for that, as you would all expect, is at that stage, we had passed the second wave, the first wave, sorry, and the second wave haven't really kicked in. So, and you'll see that trend repeated through what we present. Matt will go through it in a bit more detail when he talks about the outlook going forward. So if we move on to the next slide, the key is with regards to the recovery, where is the recovery actually kicking in and where is it maybe slow to be realized? Now, if we look at the business as usual stats, you'll see that if we look at 2 of the key constituents of the economy, SMMEs, so the small to micro to medium businesses, and corporates, they were about neck and neck in Q2, so around the start of the COVID year. But look at where we are now. A market difference. SMMEs in terms of business as usual, under 1 in 5 businesses are now operating as business as usual. So that percentage has dropped. With regards to corporates though, almost 1 in 2 corporates are now reporting that they are back to business as usual. And you can see that difference is quite marked. You'll see when we look a couple of slides down the line that that difference is even more pronounced. So here you see the number of corporates in business as usual has bounced back nicely. SMMEs are still lagging. And on the next slide, we look at the reverse side of the coin with regards to business closures. And here you can see the difference is even more pronounced. SMMEs, smaller businesses and larger businesses, the corporates, very much on par again on business closures at the start of the pandemic. And now SMMEs are 26 times more likely within their group to be closed at the moment, to be experiencing business closures than corporates. And the reasons behind that and how we respond to that market difference is something that we will talk about more. Faye in particular will pick up about how Beyond COVID hopes to assist in addressing that gap and help SMMEs bounce back as corporates are. And on the next slide, we then dig into the other perspective with regard to the recovery in terms of which particular sectors are responding in which way, which are moving up and which are, slower to recover in terms of bouncing back. So with regards to business as usual, interesting here, and I suspect this is a view that you would expect in a way. We know that when it comes to operating as usual, those businesses that are best set up for social distancing, for virtual engagement, will be the ones that will be quicker to recover to normal circumstances. I went to the bank the other day and it was interesting. I hadn't been there for about a year and they had all these shields up. I mean, if you've been to a branch, you would have noticed that. And I asked the guy on the other side of the desk what it was like in terms of numbers post-COVID. And he says their numbers have dropped substantially. Now, the difference with financial services, as an example, banking, is that there are other channels. You can do your banking through the internet, as an example, or through the call center and so on. That probably explains, why it's on the higher end here with regards to operating closer to business as usual. If you look at an area like professional services, you can see their percentage is higher than the average of 21%. And the number of businesses closed is also substantially lower. And the indication is that professional services are not as impacted. The same for real estate. I was a bit surprised by this. I would have expected real estate was a lot more face-to-face business. This might be explained by my brother and during the lockdown, buying a house, selling it and buying a new one, all in the space of a couple of months. So I'm sure that had something to do with pushing those stats up. Utilities are interesting as well, but we do need to keep the lights on. Healthcare, as you would expect, closer to business as usual, but there are obviously sectors within healthcare that are not getting the same kind of traction that other areas like hospitals dealing with COVID-19 would. And then the last slide from me before I hand over to Mutungwe is the worst performing sectors. Accommodation and food, you would expect. I mean, we all know that the sector has taken a hit. Arts, entertainment, and recreation. So given the fact that those businesses require almost people to be in close proximity, think of people sitting in a theater. Construction and education, interesting and important points here. Construction stands out particularly together with agriculture because if you break this down to SMMEs and corporates, what you see is that corporates are actually doing well. Agriculture is an example. Commercial farming had a bumper year last year, so almost no COVID impact, but the SMMEs are really struggling. So, and this is what Faye will get into in terms of how we use or help leverage the bigger guys that are doing well to help the smaller guys who are not doing as well. And construction and agriculture, bear that in mind, are two areas that provide that opportunity to use bigger businesses to help the smaller businesses pull up a level. Over to Matt, who will be talking more about the outlook going forward.
Thank you, Links. So one of the indicators we also looked at is the percentage of people that are working from home or working remotely. Now, during hard lockdown, the numbers were quite high. There were a higher proportion of people working from home. And there are industries, obviously, that would adopt this as a way of life going forward. But when we look at Q2, there were 42% of people that were staff that was working from home, and they had anticipated at that time that going forward, only about 34% would carry on working from home. When we look at Q3, it was even. So 28% of staff was working from home, and they were anticipating to continue working from home. In Q4, this is after the second wave, the numbers only increased slightly to 29% of people that are working remotely, and also planning on continuing to work remotely as under the lockdown conditions that we're still in. In terms of the next slide, there are a number of sectors that have a higher prevalence in terms of staff working remotely. And this obviously has to do with the practicalities of the type of work that they do. In the ICT sector, which is the highest, about 57% of staff are working from home. Obviously, if you remember, in the past 2 weeks or so, one of the key impediments would have been lockdown, because once there's lockdown, the network collapses, and then people that are working remotely really struggle to connect and to be able to work from home. But arts, entertainment, and recreation also has high prevalence. Real estate, 52%, also a lot of people that are working remotely. Financial services as well. I know people in the banking sector who have never laid their feedback into their offices since the first lockdown, and it's likely that this will be their way of life going forward. And so there are other industries or sectors that have a lower prevalence of staff that is working remotely. Now, if you think about agriculture, you do need people on the ground to be working in farms. I mean, in other countries, the Netherlands for sure, there are people there's technology that is already being implemented. So you find that farms are being monitored through drones and all of that. So I presume that the number would be higher there of people working from home in agricultural sector. Transportation doesn't really provide many avenues for people to work remotely. You really have to physically transport goods. Same with construction, only 12% people working remotely. Wholesale and retail, these are the people who carried us through provision of essential goods and services during the first lockdown. Healthcare as well. These are the essential frontline workers that really only a small proportion would be expected to work from home, but they are needed right within the hospitals and clinics. So it's really not shocking that the ones that are indicating a lower prevalence are the sectors like agriculture, construction, and healthcare. I think we can move to the next slide, please. And then another indicator that we looked at is planned retrenchments. As you're aware, the economy has been hit very hard, and we've started to see unemployment growing during this period of lockdown. And coupled with that is that a number of employers are indicating that they are still struggling, and they are planning on retrenching their workers. Now, small and medium enterprises are the ones that are hit hard in this instance. 13% are indicating that they are planning on retrenching some of their workers. Corporates, it's only 5%, while the non-profit sector is 6%. I mean, with the non-profit sector, really they bear the brunt, because if the corporates are not doing great, then there's there are lower corporate social investment funding that is available, meaning that NPOs are likely to not receive funding and would struggle during this period. In terms of funding needs of businesses, so here we found that only 5% of businesses that we have surveyed are indicating that they have excess cash. So 95% have no excess cash. And we can see that those that do not have any excess cash in their businesses, the corporates seem to have, a higher proportion of excess cash than SMMEs. As you saw in the previous slide, SMMEs are really struggling during this period. And you'll see in the next slide as well that about 37% of our respondents are indicating that over the next 12 months, they'll be requiring at least 6 months of funding for their operations. So while almost a third are indicating that they do not need funding for their operational costs, 37% are needing some sort of funding. And this is big because a lot of this are SMMEs, and when we aggregate the funding, we come to the value of an amount of 1.1 trillion of funding that is required by small businesses to be able to continue to operate for at least 6 months with funding, with external funding. So there are some significant funding needs within the economy as things stand. We also asked our respondents about their expectations in terms of the economy recovering. Now, at the peak of the first wave in Q2, when we asked our respondents, they were indicating that they expect that the recovery would happen. The economy, South African economy would recover after 3 years. And then as things started slowing down and, we were at the bottom of the wave, or just as we were about to hit the second wave, and in Q3, there was starting to be some, positive expectations of recovery, and they were anticipating that the recovery would happen in about, on average, 2.5 years. And we all know what happened during the third wave. The second wave. At the height of the second wave, we really saw what this COVID-19 can do. And when we conducted the survey after the second wave, we saw that people are now anticipating that it will take at least 3.5 years for the economy to recover. So the sentiment has obviously fluctuated or changed because of how people are seeing that these waves are affecting the economy, and what lockdown conditions ensues during those periods. And now the numbers are still low, but there's already talk of a third wave, and we don't know what the third wave would be like. But broadly at the moment, our respondents are only expecting the recovery the economy to fully recover after 3.5 years. I will now hand over to Faye for the Beyond COVID overview.
If I can just jump in there, thank you so much for that. I think it's really important, those findings, and the fact that it is a bleak picture for SMMEs. They need the support, and there really is a need for Beyond COVID. So we are now going to hand over to Faye Mukadam, who is the chairperson of Beyond COVID. Faye is a Chartered Director and Advocate of the High Court of South Africa. She holds a Master of Laws qualification and various other qualifications as well. And Faye is going to speak a little bit about Beyond COVID, what the focus is, and why there is a need for Beyond COVID too.
Thanks, Mandy. So the slide that's been put up now has already been flighted in one of the previous sessions where we had concluded the first round of research. And anything that it depicts isn't going to be news, I think, to anyone attending the sessions, because we are in a stage beyond crisis and catastrophe as far as SMMEs are concerned. Obviously, because of previous macroeconomic pressures, already SMEs were under pressure. But now, since COVID-19 has decimated the economy, we've seen a marked decline, and you've just heard from Lings and Matt around the catastrophic impact that that has had, where the bulk of the business closures, the bulk of the loss of employment has been felt within the SME sector. Obviously, in order for this to be recovered, and we know that in order for the economy to be stimulated, for there to be higher growth, that we are going to need to focus on the sector very specifically. We've seen some stats coming out that says in 2025, 75% of our GDP contributor will come from the SME sector. In order to do that, the Beyond COVID response has been crafted to say, well, what do we do in focusing on strengthening this SME support ecosystem? How is it that we can de-risk the risk profile of SMEs, and make sure, and I see some questions coming in the Q&A and the chat box, how do we then say, look at what government is doing, look at what the private sector is doing, etc., and some of the specific streams, whether it be in financial services, construction, ICT, how do we strengthen that ecosystem with a view to a more focused and targeted initiative, which leads to supporting and strengthening the networks and the offerings which are required by SMEs in order for them to not just rebuild, but to cement their space within the economy and then also to scale. Thank you. I don't know who's driving. So just in terms of, by way of introduction, what we've thought about, this is the second round of research results that we've gotten. And as you have seen, it's going from bad to worse. So when we initially flighted or launched the Beyond COVID initiative, we then looked at recrafting what the response would be in terms of establishing the Beyond COVID initiative, which has been registered as a non-profit making entity, but with a view to taking what we have already learned, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's been a lot of exceptional ideas, concepts, even some actions that have been taken to support the space and the sector and businesses in this space. But of course, it hasn't all worked because there's been fragmentation, everybody's doing different things, and you're pulling in the wrong direction or many different directions. What also happens is that you'll find that the people who are often offering support or offering responses to this catastrophe have not necessarily walked the road or journeyed in terms of what the experiences are in an SME environment. So what the team has done, not just based on the research, but also looking at their experience in working with the National Treasury's job funds, is looked at a different type of model where we also, based on some of the research that we've conducted and experience we've had in the agricultural sector, where we would respond by way of promoting collectives, establishing collectives where you can leverage the collective, use economies of scale, and actually start negotiating and engaging with big business in a different way. So not only does that lead to, like I said, rebuilding, cementing, but also growth and scale, which is important in terms of business sustainability. Thank you, Ray. The business model of the Beyond COVID NPC is fairly simple. It is driven by a partnership approach. I think Jaco talked about, us needing to work together, or the fact that this doesn't bode well for social cohesion in South Africa. The reality is if we don't all pull together and appreciate that we're all interconnected in terms of our economy, and we've seen it from the disruption in the global value chain, then nothing's going to change, and we'll be having this terrible conversation in a few years' time. So looking at the slide on screen, what we've said is we will pull in different partnerships with established business, entities, whether they be government or private sector, that have worked in this space and that already have some systems set up. So whether they be sponsors or investors, you're looking at your DFIs, your financial services institutions, etc., as well as suppliers, service providers. What is it that they have been doing, have had in place, but how do we take that and we twin it with this idea that is driving Beyond COVID NPC, and that is the SME collective. So this is a first in South Africa in that it hasn't quite been crafted in this way. The SME collective, of course, would be driving the actual growth. Historically, we've seen, and you can tie it back to my first slide, of course, but historically, we've seen that all the different support institutions have offered some type of funding, which unfortunately has often been the death of an SME because of the gearing and the terms. We've also seen a measure of market access, but not too much. And then there's been, of course, the default is always training or skills development. Whilst all of that is critical, we're taking it to a next level and looking at what enabling tech needs to be provided. What is the enabling services that take a small entity, a micro entity, into a medium entity, into being an established entity that doesn't necessarily grow in numbers, but becomes smarter about the way that it does business. And so you are almost guaranteed through this enabling framework to have a step change, which means that you can grow and you can actively contribute to SMME sustainability. What we've done through driving this partnership model is obviously we're looking at accessing chambers of commerce. In fact, when I was president of the JCCI, we actually launched the SME Exporter Incubator with DTI and the Standard Bank at the time. So, and we've already seen how if you have focus on what the SME needs in order not just to grow, but to make sure that they sustain, that was specifically focused on exporters, then you'll see that it can be done. It just needs a lot more focus and people pulling in the right directions. So the partnership approach, we're looking at accessing the chambers of commerce, different professional associations, obviously working closely with Treasury, the Jobs Fund, and KISB SME Fund, which is the new SME fund that's been launched under the For Africa Exchange umbrella. Thank you. So, of course, I think the key question that everybody's going to ask is why beyond COVID? Why? What's different? The difference is that we take everything and all the fragmented initiatives and all the engagements that we've had previously, a lot of good people doing good things, but everybody doing it in little silos. And we pull it all together, and instead of one SME going and trying to access, whether it be training or funding, etc., we then construct them into SMME collectives. What that does is it immediately de-risks the SMME risk profile. It also means that through this collaboration that you've got a lot more negotiation power. It also means that internally how you work within the collective will allow you to leverage not just cross-skilling and transfer of skilling, but that the enabling technology, the enabling services can be offered to the collective itself and not just to the individual SMEs. This becomes a lot more important when you're looking to engage with SME funds, the development finance institutions, when you're looking at the different banks, etc. And so once you take that and you use that as a growth engine for the collective, you'll find that it's much easier to scale up. So we're talking key here about making sure that under one banner, under one umbrella, you have a very clearly constructed SME collective driven vision. But in the way that it has been built up, we've spent a lot of time making sure that the people who have been appointed to the board and the board subcommittees are people who have depth of experience and expertise, huge credibility, not just in governance, in finance, but also in the different streams that we've identified in our first round that we're going to access. I'm going to then leave it there, Mandy, because I am mindful of time and rather hand over back to you, and then we can answer questions and give more information through the Q&A. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Faye. That really was really interesting, and we can just see the need for SMMEs coming through on the chat as well. People saying, how comforting it is for SMMEs to have the support, and it's so needed. So there are already quite a few questions in the Q&A and the chat, but if you have any questions for Faye or for Lings or Matt, anybody, please post them in the chat and I will facilitate that. So we're going to have a panel discussion now, and I want to invite to the panel Thelma Machoko, who is also a founding board member of Beyond COVID. Thelma is the director at Biodegradable SA. She's a seasoned professional with over 13 years of consulting experience. So Thelma will join Faye, and Lings and Matt, I can ask you to just switch your cameras on as well and your microphones. And I'm going to start off with a question from myself. I have a few questions and then we'll go through the questions in the chat. So I think maybe Lings, we'll start with you. Do the survey results indicate how soon the South African economy will recover from COVID-19?
Thank you, Mandy, for that very difficult question. But what it does indicate is sentiment. So sentiment, as Matt pointed out, indicates that, we're looking at about October 2024 before people see the economy bouncing back. In terms of the underlying data that has been provided by the survey, I think it gives us a good indication on other dimensions as well. So as an example, SMMEs, and we know they account for 72% of jobs. Now, I'll pause for a second just to let that sink in. So I know when we look at the state of the economy, we look at the big corporates, the mines, the banks, and so on. But in terms of jobs, 72% of jobs, so 7 out of 10 jobs are actually accounted for by SMMEs. The expectation in terms of job creation is that 90% of new jobs will be created by SMMEs. And that's why, as Beyond COVID, we've taken such a laser focus on that sector. Now, to answer your question, the one indicator in terms of recovery is how soon will we get those jobs back that were lost. So if you look at the number of jobs that SMMEs say they're going to lose, that's 1.2 million. Now, that just sounds like a number, but to put that in context, in South Africa at the moment, we have 15 million jobs. So it's quite a big chunk. If you look at the rate at which government has created jobs in the past, the work we've done with National Treasury indicates that that's about 140,000 jobs a year. At that rate, it'll take us 7 years to get those jobs back. So although the perception is already, fairly conservative or fairly, negative in that people are saying it's going to take 3 to 4 years to recover. Based on our experiences in the past, it could be much longer. We could be looking at up to 7 years just to recover the SMME jobs.
Great, thank you, Lings, for that answer to a difficult question. Thelma, I think I'm going to direct this next one to you. It's a question in the Q&A from Robin Irwin. It says, small businesses have been devastated by the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And whilst the government has put aside money to help them stay afloat, this is not reaching the businesses that need it. The criteria used to approve loans would appear to be the same as was used prior to the pandemic. Hence, an enormously high rejection rate is occurring. What initiatives are in place to provide much needed capital to enable these businesses to pivot? There we go.
Yeah. So I think if you look at the approach that the business model is looking at a more 360-degree kind of approach to supporting small businesses, and that's more about leveraging all the different sources. And so for us, we look at that sort of approach as in terms of being able to enhance the growth of the SMME and accelerate it a lot better.
And Thelma, just in terms of government's response, there has been some criticism that government just hasn't responded sufficiently. What would you tell SMMEs about that?
Well, it's obviously from the fragmented approach to doing it. And as we say, if we look at the template model that we, business model that we're looking at putting together and leveraging for the SMME support, for me, that should be able to augment what the government response is.
Great, thank you so much. Faye, I think maybe this one is for you from Jaco Vlok. What, in your opinion, are the fundamental macro building blocks for a coordinated and focused response for SMMEs? I don't have much confidence in big business coming to the party fully. And Jaco also saying here a little bit earlier on the big companies, the cash are growing at the expense of the small. This is not good for social cohesion in South Africa's ICT sector.
So first of all, I think, and Jaco has reached out to Ling, so I think that we can harness a lot of Jaco's passion, which is clear from a lot of his inputs. I think just to build on what Thelma said first, Mandy, by way of response, is to be clear that we cannot be defaulting to despondence and disillusionment. That is important. We cannot throw up our hands and say government hasn't done anything, big business isn't going to do anything. What we need to appreciate is that a lot is being done, but it is not targeted and focused, and it doesn't necessarily unfold in a manner where there is a very clear objective here. If we all accept, and I'm assuming there's no debate about it, that the SMEs are going to be essentially our future, SME development is going to be critical in terms of our contributions to the economy and the stimulation and growth thereof, then we need to adopt a different approach. So by way of the collective, what we're saying is we want to take the pain, not take it away, share the pain with the entrepreneurs, with the SME drivers, let them focus on doing what they know how to do, as opposed to asking them to wear the hat as chief marketing officer, chief financial officer, chief bottle washer, etc. So in establishing a collective, you have things like enabling services, enabling technology platforms that allow the SMME driver, the business owner, to do what he or she does best. Now, we're not saying that we're reinventing the wheel, because big business does do that through their enterprise development, their CSI spend. Government does do that. We've seen it with CEDA, with CIFA, with NSICA of old. But it's about pulling all of this together and saying more than that. We don't want to give any grants. We don't want to just help you build a website. We want to walk shoulder to shoulder with you to say that we're contributing for you to become commercially viable and, more importantly, commercially sustainable, because then you're also creating employment opportunities, and eventually, through a domino effect, you're increasing the number of productive members of the economy who are contributing to our tax base. So this isn't a quick fix, and it's not something that Beyond COVID NPC can do by itself. You've got to pull all of these people together, and that's why the whole paradigm around a partnership engagement is so critical. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Faye. There's quite a few more questions for you around the SMMEs. I'm going to come back to you with that, with lots of questions about how businesses are being supported. Matt, I do want to ask you a specific question relating to the research and the different industries that have been affected. We know agriculture obviously has been doing well, as you said, remarkable, the fact that it's done so well. But what are the learnings around some of the other industries that are not performing and not recovering well? And how can those industries specifically be assisted along?
That's a very difficult question, Mandy, but
my job here is to ask difficult questions, right?
Look, when you consider sectors like ICT, they are in a space where they've been able to function, right? Because their work is, as I have indicated, they're able to work remotely. And being able to work remotely means that they've been able to almost stay afloat, including other business services. And we've seen that agriculture was one of the first few to be, when lockdown started, they were the first ones to be allowed to continue to operate, and that has really allowed them to stay afloat during lockdown conditions. So I guess the most important thing with all the other sectors is finding ways to continue to operate, even whether we hit the third wave or not, that we find innovative ways of ensuring that as we hit the third wave, we don't go into a complete shutdown, that there are ways that enables businesses to continue to produce, to manufacture, to operate, so that the economy does not continue, shut down completely. And because without production, really, there's no going to be any growth.
Great, Mats, thank you so much. There are a lot of questions coming in. I want to try and get through as many as possible. So if I don't direct them to the right person, feel free, panelists, to jump in here. Mashudu Ramachoma saying, will we need to physically redesign our work environments to facilitate social distancing that could remain a restriction for a long time to come? How will we tackle this in shared working environments or co-working spaces? Lings, maybe?
Sure, yeah. It's an incredibly good question. And I think one that we need to properly answer if we're going to bounce back from the impact of COVID sooner rather than later. The reality is there are some professions that have been hard hit, for instance, personal services, that are going to continue to face difficulties for a while. For a lot of other businesses, I think a degree of social distancing is possible. The way in which that can be done, if you look at some of the more practical aspects, the PPE aspects as an example. I mentioned when I went to the bank, I realized that my relationship banker looks very different, separated by a pane of glass, but we can still transact. So there are physical measures that can be put in place. In the manual that Beyond COVID has produced, which is the kind of how to deal with the impacts of Beyond COVID, what we do is we look at, one of the things we recommend is deconstruct what value you are adding to the client, to the customer, and how you can provide that in a way that is still socially distanced. So as an example, if you think about a restaurant, part of the value for a client in visiting a restaurant is a good meal. There's also the physical engagement as an example in terms of social interaction. There's the ambiance of being in a good setting. So some restaurants have actually deconstructed that quite well and said, some of our customers are really here to have a quick meal and leave. So with those, the takeaway options, the eat at home options, the cook at home options have all, borne fruit. And I think, in summary, then there's two ways of responding to the social distancing requirements. The one is, in a restaurant, can we place the tables further apart? The other is, how do you re-engineer the value offering, pick out elements that can be more socially distanced, so you then serve different customers differently in terms of what their requirements are. But not an easy one, Mandy.
Mandy, can I just add to that? Because one of the things around this SME collective and how do you repurpose your business and how do you rejig the economy for Beyond COVID is around, and I mentioned it earlier, around this de-risking the SMME profile. And largely what that talks to is financial institutions. So you want them on board because they're not taking too much of a risk. But I think it's important for the SMEs to understand that they themselves need to embrace risk and embrace risk agility. So whether it's COVID or a pandemic today, or whether it is digital disruption or disruption or transformation of anything of a business, what you really are wanting to inculcate is this ability to move and be resilient and risk agile. And that thinking is something that can be enhanced. And I saw Ilse made a comment that she's blooming in the financial services space. 100%. We're seeing a lot of growth. And that's why I think the whole idea of doom and gloom, oh my God, you know, we can do a lot. We just need to really focus and get going now.
A lot of it's about attitude and perspective and seeing the opportunities in a time of crisis and chaos. In fact, Ilse Nel, as you said there, Faye, says, I'm in the financial services sector. I'm experienced a bloom in business. Why would that be? Or am I just so lucky? So that's, I mean, that's an interesting perspective.
Pay it forward.
Musa Nkhlapo says, how important is it for small businesses to have a COVID-proof business model going forward? And that ties in with a question here from Mtobisi Sekhlabela that says, do you have a recovery model at hand that you can share with the SMMEs that are struggling to recover, as the government won't always be there to assist, but maybe a roadmap on how to take it slow can help, which is essentially what Beyond COVID is doing, right?
Correct. I don't know if things wants to jump in, but you know, the first thing we need to change is government's not there just to assist. Government is not a revenue generating entity. It is a conduit for deployment of taxpayer contributions. So in terms of that, we need to get out of the mindset of being on the receiving end of anything. And the roadmap is about enabling and allowing, through the Beyond COVID NPC, allowing the SMME, the driver, to focus on what he or she does and knows best. Because let me tell you, your gut instinct as an entrepreneur is always spot on. So it is, though, about saying through the government channels, through the private sector spend, how do we then offer this enabling, whether it be services or platforms, etc.? How do we offer it to get businesses to scale? Lings, I don't know if you want to add specifically.
Just a very quick comment, Mandy, and you hit the nail on the head in terms of Beyond COVID. Is particularly relevant now, but it's highlighting issues through the survey and proposing solutions that are going to be quite pervasive. You know, they are going to help SMMEs and other businesses going forward. And, you know, a key pointer from the survey results is you probably recall that 26% of SMMEs are closed at the moment and 1% of corporates. Now that gives us a pointer to how SMMEs can respond now and be more resilient going forward. What we want is we want to create small behemoths. So we want to create SMMEs that, if you block your eyes, look and feel like a corporate. And imagine that. I mean, think about it. When the CFO from Standard Bank, no offense, but when the CFO from Standard Bank walks into a bank, okay, bad example, when the CFO from MTN walks into a bank, you know, they're going to roll out the red carpet and say, you know, how big should the blank check be? When an SMME walks in, I promise you the reception is not going to be the same. So how do we position SMMEs to have that kind of reception when they go out there looking for the resources they need? And the same applies now. The reasons that corporates are bouncing back so quickly is because they have that resilience. And the way we create that resilience through Beyond COVID, as Faye has indicated, is through SMME collectives. What they do is they provide all of the support, but also access to services and enabling technology. So in agriculture, if a farmer does scientific analysis of his soil, he can choose at the start of the growing season what his best crop is going to be to give him the best yield, the best return, the lowest risk. In construction, if you can present, you know, a strong enough risk profile, then you will be able to access the business, but you need the support, the SMME collective with the military operate to do that.
So let's pick up on exactly what you've been talking about there. And I think, Thelma, maybe you can assist with this one. Maria Prefado says, thank you for the informative session. As a 100% women-owned construction company, How can I be assisted to be able to connect with higher graded construction companies to get subcontract work and build my country and its CIDB grading, as the CIDB grading is one of the limiting factors excluding other interferences such as supply chain corruption and political interferences and so forth. Maria says that she's been trying to connect higher graded construction companies, sending profiles. Still, we don't get help or any support from our higher graded construction companies.
So I think in terms of COVID itself, the construction company has been far hard hit than most other companies. So I will just go back to what Faye was talking about in terms of the agility of small businesses and being able to plug into different construction collectives, to be able to plug into the corporates and enhance your CIDB gradings.
Anybody else want to add anything there?
I can as well. Years ago, and again, this is a panel, so it's not giving any company a plug. And I mean, it's many years ago, about 15 years ago. Stefanucci Stocks, at that time, before it was popular or sexy to do so, had actually taken one of their service provider under the company's wing, a black woman, and she was given support in terms of the company underwriting her purchases of equipment, of big cats, etc., earth-moving equipment. But what they did is, in underwriting it, they also made a commitment to use her and her equipment on their live project so that she could actually pay off her equipment or service the arrangement that she had with the bank. So I think, as opposed to being on the receiving end and a recipient of anybody's magnanimity or generosity or kindness, what we're saying is business, government, and SMMEs, of course, can be in a kind of a new tripartite agreement where we're all partners, where we are all co-responsible and co-accountable for growing and contributing to the economy. So the SMEs are not doing private sector favor and vice versa. We're saying that in order for us to grow, we need your support as a partner. But of course, you need to be able to deliver and perform according to a certain standard. So I think when it comes to the CIDB grading, if we create that enabling space where big companies have partners in these SME collectives, then the more you work on the bigger projects, then you can prove that you can go up a CIDB level.
Right,
and if I can, I know we're probably short on time, but I just want to add very, very quickly. It's very important that Beyond COVID is not just a talk shop. As important as it is to operate at the strategic level, the TACI really hits the tarmac at the practical level. So the sectors we are targeting are agriculture, construction. We know in those two sectors in particular, SMEs are really struggling. And the good news is the big guys are not struggling as much. They are bouncing back. So is there an opportunity for the smaller guy to tap at the back of the bigger guy and lift up as they float up to the surface? That's the one thing. And the third sector is then manufacturing. The other thing is we already have projects. We are working with SME collectives at the moment. So there's the Urban Agriculture Initiative in agriculture. There's the Construction Trading Corporation that we are working with in construction. And what we're experiencing here practically is exactly what Faye has talked about, what Thelma's referred to in terms of 360-degree support. You know, in the States, they talked about no kid left behind. Here, it's going to be no piece of support left behind. We're going to ensure that the SMME is not just given a handout. They are provided with support and they are enabled. We want to see those SMMEs grow and walk into the Standard Bank, maybe not with a red carpet, but maybe like a pink one or a green one, some other color. And that will happen. It's going to take time, but it will happen.
Lingis, I think that you dream about walking into the bank at night. I think most of us get nightmares. Dream about it. We are going to end off soon. Matt, I do want to ask you one last question. There's a point here from Dion in the Q&A that says, a comment here that we're all missing is that Beyond COVID relies on a rapid and comprehensive vaccine rollout. Government's the only channel that pharma companies are dealing with at the moment globally, not the private healthcare sector. So I'm not sure if this came up in your survey at all, but how important is the vaccine rollout to the recovery of businesses?
As you're aware, and I want to be controversial, we don't really have a rollout yet. If you were to compare what we have with what is happening in countries that are having a rollout, we really have not started. And if the vaccine is what they say it is in terms of helping with the herd immunity and helping us to be able to sail through COVID and recover, we haven't started. I mean, the numbers are quite low. We've just covered healthcare workers, and you hear about 20,000 batch and another 30,000 coming in. It's really we're not there yet. We still need a rollout of this vaccine for the general population. And if you followed the numbers in terms of how long it will take at this pace to cover the 40 million people, they're taking something like 18 years or something. So we need the vaccine rollout to begin, and hopefully government is doing something in terms of engaging with suppliers or manufacturers of this vaccine.
Let's
So
hope. Go ahead.
Just to add on to what Matt is saying, we actually need for SMMEs to actually thrive and carry on. We should rely less on that vaccine rollout, simply because just the global supply is very slow, and it's going to take a long time to get to us. So for SMMEs to actually really thrive, they need to look at non-pharmaceutical interventions.
Unfortunately, that's the truth currently. If you go look at those, as Matt said, those vaccine calculators, we are all going to wait 18 years, something mad like that, before we get vaccines. But let's be hopeful that they will start arriving when the real rollout will start. We are almost out of time. I want to give you all 30 seconds. Lings, I'm not sure, can you do that? 30 seconds to wrap up any comments that you'd like to make. And then at the end, we are just going to announce the winner of the lucky draw. Lings, let's start with you.
I've never done it before, Mandy, but it's always the first time. I think the key message here is that we need to translate SMMEs into the risk profile that the corporates enjoy. It's possible. We need SMMEs to operate as collectives. They must band together. And if we can do that, and we can do that with the help of Beyond COVID, that's really our focus. What we can do is we can make SMMEs bankable, so they do get some color of carpet when they walk in, Mandy.
Great, thanks, Faye.
I think that, despite all the personal tragedy, that we need to focus on what it is that we can do differently and better. And so we need to look at COVID as having given us an opportunity to see exactly what and I think Jaco talked about the fault lines, exactly where we can do better, because now we're not just talking about lives, but livelihoods. And if you focus on livelihoods, then people can live a better quality of life. So I think in terms of just the vision and the purpose of this, it will actually serve to address a lot of the historic and current economic tragedies that we're living and seeing every day. So I think we must be positive. We must grab the opportunity with both hands and take responsibility for each other and for doing better and being better.
Okay, great. I see that some people have commented that they're struggling with the audio. It seems to be okay on our side, so we'll just keep going for now. But maybe, Rayleigh, if you want to just have a quick look at that. Thelma, your wrap up in 30 seconds.
I think for me, the fact that there's an opportunity to leverage on different opportunities that are there, and just look at a more 360 degree of support for what can be a very lonely place as an SMME. It's it's a good chance to actually thrive as an SMME beyond COVID.
Right. Thank you, Thelma. Matt?
Thank you, Mandy. So I just want to thank Eve from the Jobs Fund. She's responded to a good question about providing support on SMME construction. It was one of the questions that was asked earlier, and it's they're saying that there is a construction development program that can be provided to people that need CIDB grading. But yeah, there is COVID Beyond COVID is a great initiative, and we are really hoping that we'll be able to support SMMEs to grow and to be sustainable, and to be able to provide jobs and livelihoods for our communities. Thank you.
Tungwe, thank you so much. Thank you to all of the panelists for those contributions. There are still some questions that we haven't quite got to. If you want to just take the next couple of minutes to maybe respond in writing, you're welcome to do that. In the meantime, there was a lucky draw for the participants of the survey. So I'm going to read out the winner of that lucky draw. It's 10,000 Rand. Link says you can collect it in a black bag from the Michelangelo Hotel. Just kidding. We don't do that in South Africa.
Mandy!
I'm sorry, I meant the compound in Saxonwood.
Touche.
And the winner is, drum roll.
Wow.
Timbanani Kambule from KwaZulu-Natal. That's a 10,000 Rand prize. Wow. I don't know how you're going to get it. I don't want to know.
You might need to go to Nkandla for that.
Touche. Anyway, moving along. So I do want to thank you all. I think this has been enormously interesting and helpful, giving you the lowdown on the lockdown. And can you believe it has been a year already since we went into lockdown in South Africa? That balance of lives and livelihoods, we're all still trying to manage that. So thank you to the Beyond COVID team. I think that it's hugely valuable, and I think we're going to be hearing more about the results of the survey as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Mandy, thank you. Thank you.
Salutation.